text for the question. As you can see here, just enter your name, your title is fine, but more or less just your name and your city would be great. Again, all your lines are muted, but obviously ours are not in here. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it on over to Sohab. She's our first speaker today. She's going to kind of go over the agenda a little bit and then introduce some of the other speakers that will be participating in today's webinar. Sohab?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Sohab Mahmood. I'm with the California Department of Housing and Community Development, also known as HCD, in the Housing Policy Division. I am on the Technical Assistance Team for LEAP. So I'm going to go over the agenda just really briefly. We're going to provide an overview of this program, provide an idea of what the eligible applicants are, go over the award amounts, discuss the eligible activities, including ProHousing policies, discuss eligible uses, some important key dates, an overview of the application process, and then also discuss what kind of TA we have available for this program. Okay. So why don't we go ahead and dive into it. So what is LEAP and where did it come from, essentially? So to understand where LEAP came from, it's important to look at what's kind of happened over the last couple of years in the legislature before we ended up with LEAP. In 2017, we had a 2017 housing package where the legislature passed a monumental housing package. And as a result of that housing package, we got Senate Bill 2, also known as SB 2, which created the state's first permanent source of funding for affordable housing. Then in 2018 through 2019, of the first year of the SB 2 funding source, 50% of that funding went to develop a planning grants program. That program was meant to help cities and counties plan for housing and set the regulatory framework for housing to occur in their communities. As we implemented the SB 2 planning grants, which I'm sure many of you are familiar, in 2019 we received applications from 491 cities and counties. That's almost 90% of the state applied for the SB 2 planning grants program. Applicants applied for a variety of activities, including rezoning land for by right development and at higher densities, developing standards and programs that encourage ADUs, implementing process improvements such as permit tracking systems to reduce the time it takes to process permit applications, and many more activities. As we implemented the SB 2 planning grants, we got a new governor who made housing a high priority. He came in with the 2019-2020 Budget Act, which included a combination of funding, incentives, and accountability measures for local governments. One of these funding programs was the Early Action Planning Grants, also known as LEAP and REAP, which has allocated $250 million to local and regional governments to accelerate housing production and plan for their six-cycle RHNA. As you can see on the slide, concurrently with many of these funding programs, incentives, and measures, the six-cycle RHNA has been or could significantly increase for many regions throughout California, and local governments may have a higher number of housing needs that they need to accommodate for. In February 2020, just recently, HCD released the NOFA for the local government's allocation for the Early Action Planning Grants, also known as LEAP, which we're here to discuss today. This is another one-time funding opportunity, much like the SB 2 planning grants, for local governments to receive grants that help them plan for housing. Also in February 2020, the department hopes to release the NOFA for the regional portion of the Early Action Planning Grants. This program is referred to as REAP, which stands for Regional Early Action Planning. The REAP program is limited to regional governments and regional entities as defined in statute. But this program allows for your COG and regional entities to apply for funding to either develop a technical assistance program, administer costs, sub-allocate their allocation to local governments, and or improve their RHNA methodology. Also, in summer of 2020, as an incentive of the Budget Act, HCD is developing a process where cities and counties can get awarded for implementing pro-housing policies. We are currently in the process of working on emergency regulation and should have that finalized in the summer of 2020. We will be going more into the pro-housing program during this presentation. So a little bit more information on the 2019-2020 Budget Act, where LEAP came from. It included a myriad of funding, incentives, and accountability measures that help jurisdictions plan for and accelerate housing production. Funding included more planning money to local and regional governments to accelerate housing production, again, much like the SB2 planning grants. Incentives included creating a program that enables cities and counties to gain a ProHousing designation for having land use and planning policies that are conducive to housing development. Localities who can gain this designation will receive additional points and be more competitive for different state funding programs. But also paired with these fundings and incentives came accountability measures. For example, one of those accountability measures is that cities and counties can be fined for failing to comply with state housing element law. So gaining compliance in the sixth cycle will be even more important. Now we'll go into a little bit more details about LEAP. LEAP provides one-time funding in the form of planning grants to cities and counties in a non-competitive fashion to prepare, adopt, and implement planning documents and process improvements that, number one, accelerate housing production, and two, facilitate compliance to help local governments implement their sixth cycle RHNA. The eligible applicants for the LEAP program are limited to local governments, which is cities and counties. However, much like the SB2 planning grants, there is room for partnership between other cities and counties or other local entities if the proposal has a direct effect on land use or development within the participating localities. For example, partnerships can include local entities such as regional governments, housing authorities, school districts, community-based organizations, and other neighboring cities and counties. For the award amounts, the maximum award amount for your jurisdiction is based off the DOF population estimates of January 1st, 2019. If you are a jurisdiction with a population size of 750,000 people or greater, the maximum you can apply for is $1.5 million. If you are a jurisdiction with a population size of 300,000 people to under 750,000 people, the maximum amount you can apply for is $750,000. If you are a jurisdiction with a population size of 100,000 people to under 300,000 people, the maximum amount you can apply for is $500,000. If you are a jurisdiction with a population size of 60,000 people to under 100,000 people, the maximum amount you can apply for is $300,000. Lastly, if you are a jurisdiction with a population size of 20,000 people to under 60,000 people, the maximum amount you can apply for is $150,000. If you're a jurisdiction with a population size of less than 20,000 people, the maximum you are eligible for is $65,000. Regardless of size, any jurisdiction can apply for a minimum of $25,000. Now I'm going to hand it over to Hillary, who's part of the program, who's going to go into details about the eligible activities.
So now for an overview of the eligible activities. The goal of your proposed project should be to accelerate housing production and facilitate compliance with implementing the sixth cycle RHNA. All activities must demonstrate an increase in housing-related planning activities and facilitate accelerated housing production. An eligible activity can be part of a larger planning effort, such as a comprehensive zoning code update if 1, the proposed activity has not been completed prior to the release of the NOFA, is a distinct project, and demonstrates a nexus to accelerating housing production. There is a long list of eligible activities, and the slide does not include every eligible activity. Please make sure to take a look at the NOFA for a list of all eligible activities. Many activities are eligible if they are planning and accelerate housing production. Some eligible activities include CEQA streamlining through completing an environmental clearance that eliminates the need for project-specific review, implementing local process improvements that speed up the approval process for housing, developing and improving ADU ordinances, developing pre-approved architectural and site plans, housing elements that include a strong implementation component to help facilitate compliance with sixth cycle RHNA, encouraging development and rezoning by updating planning documents and ordinances such as general plans, community plans, specific plans, implementation of sustainable community strategies or local coastal plans, rezoning for multifamily housing, rezoning to comply with housing element requirements, rezoning to encourage housing development, upzoning, zoning for by right supportive housing, and zoning incentives for special needs populations. Eligible activities also include pro-housing policies. Pro-housing policies facilitate the planning, approval, and construction of housing. Policies may include, but are not limited to, planning for local financial incentives for housing, such as a local housing trust fund, reducing parking requirements for sites zoned for residential development, by right zoning for residential and mixed-use development, process improvements that reduce permit processing time, objective design and development standards, and more. Pro-housing was mentioned in the previous slide, but what is pro-housing? The pro-housing program is a result of the 2019-2020 Budget Act. It is a way to reward local actors for enacting land use and regulatory policies that are housing friendly. HCD is working on developing emergency regulations which will set forth a process by which a city can gain a pro-housing designation or label. The program will designate jurisdictions as pro-housing when they demonstrate policies and strategies to accelerate housing production. If you're a local government and you receive a pro-housing designation, you can receive bonus points on several different competitive funding programs. Examples of programs include the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, the Transformative Climate Communities Program, and the Infill Infrastructure Grant Program. Pro-housing policies fall into a few categories, including favorable zoning, decreased timeframes to approve permits, reducing construction and development costs, and providing financial subsidies. The following are examples of pro-housing policies: allowing residential and mixed uses by right, zoning more sites for residential or increasing densities, allowing for parking reductions, limiting the number of public hearings to 3 or fewer, adopting ADU ordinances that reduce barriers to develop ADUs, creating objective and design and development standards, and establishing a local housing trust fund. The following activities are not eligible under this program. First, any proposed activity that is unrelated to preparing and adopting planning documents or process improvements that do not seek to accelerate housing production or facilitate compliance to implement the 6-cycle RHNA. Second, project-specific planning documents that do not have a significant impact on accelerating housing production, significant community-level impact, or reoccurring benefit beyond the duration of the project. Third, any activity that obstructs or hinders housing production, such as moratoriums, downzoning, planning documents with conditional use permits that significantly impact the cost, supply, or approval certainty and timing, or other planned development permits, or similarly constraining processes. However, downzoning or moratoriums may be an eligible project if you can assemble a proposal that includes a combination of downzoning and upzoning that will have a positive net effect on accelerating housing production. For example, an applicant could propose to combine an open space designation, downzoning, or anti-displacement measure with by right upzoning for a significant increase in housing capacity. Eligible uses of funds include staffing and consultants to implement the eligible activity, costs associated with preparing and adopting the eligible activity, subcontracting to implement the eligible activity, and up to 5% of the grant amount can be used for administrative costs for the proposed activity. Now, some key dates to remember. The NOFA was released recently on January 27, 2020. The NOFA release date started the over-the-counter application period. Our NOFA workshops will take place during February and March of this year. We will be hosting workshops in Southern California, San Diego, Northern California, and Bay Area as our main NOFA workshops. We will also provide regional technical assistance workshops. If you're familiar with our outreach approach to the SB2 Planning Grants program, we held large NOFA workshops and also hosted more regionally focused smaller presentations, and meetings at the regional, sub-regional, and county level. We will be looking to do the same with this program, so feel free to invite us if you'd like us to do a regional presentation. The over-the-counter period to submit applications began when we released the NOFA on January 27th. The final due date for applications is July 1st, 2020. The Technical Assistance Program will run from March 2020 to December 2023. More information on what this will look like is mentioned later in the presentation. The date to expend all of your grant funds is December 2023. Most projects should be complete by that date. Those that submit early will get the money faster and will avoid delay of submitting close to the deadline. We encourage you to submit as soon as possible to avoid any delay in processing times. And now I'll turn it over to Irvin to go over the application.
Thank you, Hillary.
Okay, I'm sorry, but before we do that, this would probably be a pretty good time to remind folks how to ask a question. Haven't seen any questions come in just yet, but if you do, please use your little question bar on the right-hand side. But I do actually have a couple questions. Oh, here comes our first question. Fantastic. Okay. Okay, so the question is, they've just applied for an SB2 planning grant. Can they use some of the LEAP dollars for similar work?
Sure. Well, if you apply for an SB2 planning grant and now you are eligible for LEAP funding and you would like to further enhance your project that you applied for through SB2 planning grants, so let's say go into a little bit more detail on that project that you applied for, you can use that LEAP funding to supplement that project that was applied for through SB2 funds. You can't double dip. So, for example, if SB2 planning grants is paying for one project, you can't use LEAP funds to pay for that same project. However, you can use LEAP funds to either enhance a current SB2 project or do a brand new project.
Great. So now, is there an opportunity, let's say that the project that they want to undertake exceeds the amount of money they received under SB2 planning grants, could you then add some of the LEAP dollars to it to help it pencil out a little bit better? Yeah,
that's true. As long as using the LEAP funding also accelerates housing production, you can, in fact, do that.
Excellent. Okay, my folks are typing, here, we got another question. Is there a reimbursement for the grant?
Yes, correct. This is a reimbursement program, much like the SB2 planning grants, where after you've applied and your application has been approved, you will submit invoices to the department based on completed deliverables, and you will get reimbursed for those invoices.
Excellent. Okay, while folks are typing in questions, I actually had a couple about the ProHousing designations. This is something obviously that went through in the budget, and I know you're working on the regs, so I don't want you to get yourself known for too much information here, but I'm kind of curious, like, what are some initial thoughts as far as how many of these designations are you guys looking for cities or how many of these activities are you looking for cities to do? And do you anticipate like ranking it, so the more you do, the more competitive you're going to get, and have it as a bit of a sliding scale? So that's question one. And then the other half of it would be, I'm assuming that if a jurisdiction already has adopted these or have adopted in the last year or two, or they'll get credit, if you will, for adopting those ProHousing designations already, correct?
Sure. I'll pass it over to Paul, who's running the ProHousing program, to kind of answer some of those questions.
Oh, I should have been listening then.
Oh, come on.
All right, I'll repeat my question. Okay, so as Paul McDougall comes up here, he's with HCD as well. The question was, when we see the whole list, and I'm trying to find the right slide. I think I might have already passed it, but
right there.
Oh yeah, here we go. So on the slide, it lists a whole host of activities that cities can undertake to that the department may deem as being pro-housing or ways to demonstrate that they want to spur housing construction in their community. And the question is, is it going to be a sliding scale so that the more a city adopts, the more competitive they're going to be for these various pots of funds? And that if they've already adopted some of these, are they going to essentially get credit for the prior, good actions that they've taken to adopt these pro-housing functions?
Right. So it has to go through a process. We're going through emergency regulations, then we'll follow that up with a full regulation. So there's a lot of public process that will go into that thinking. We've prepared a framework paper, and first in that framework paper, we've laid out a list that is a little bit beyond that, and we've also kind of created these big buckets. And the thinking there is to provide some flexibility, but also provide some impact as far as local government. So the way we've laid it out is as long as you just in draft form, or have something in those 3 or 4 buckets, if you can go back one slide.
Oh, okay.
Then you're probably going to be the pro-housing, but we might be looking at some things having more value than others, but that's yet to be seen.
Okay.
So we're hoping. Yeah, you're slowly getting there.
Those are 3 buckets?
We're like in a completely different place now. So.
Go back.
Okay.
One more. And then the 3 buckets are at the
categories right there.
The categories, okay.
Yeah, 4 categories. So likely, if they've used the SB2 or if they're going to be using the LEAP for pro-housing stuff, yes, that would be eligible for that.
Okay.
But again, we haven't defined those.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're hoping, the reason why we have this slide here is that we're trying to send a signal that these are the things that could be pro-housing.
Right.
So think about using your LEAP money to be doing these things.
Totally. So the state essentially will pay you to undertake some of these activities, which then ultimately lead to greater competitiveness for certain grants.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, good. Looks like we've had a few more questions come in, and one here is, if we believe an SB2 task will not be completed within the SB2 timeframe, should we include the task for this grant opportunity?
Yeah, we'd want to look at that full proposal. One thing in the SB2, we made it pretty clear in the guidelines that we are looking for adopted documents within a certain time frame. But you could have, say, a situation where you have a proposal that has like 4 or 5 deliverables, and you know, you are adopting documents, you are meeting that standard, but you're going to come in with a LEAP to complement that program, and that date could go beyond that. So we want to kind of get a finer sense of the proposal.
Yeah. Okay, there was a follow-up question to the earlier one where you can kind of layer the grants, and I think Soham answered this one, but, you know, just to be clear, you know, they received an SB2 grant of around $160,000, but the proposals coming in were more like $350,000 to actually complete it. And they just want to make sure that, yes, they could possibly layer on LEAP to help fund the entire package, or at least get them closer to that $350,000.
Yeah, we just want to make sure we're not funding the same thing through both programs.
Okay.
So, you know, we can kind of work with that full proposal and what they're looking at, but as long as they're not on, you know, funding the same exact thing, we fully set the table for them to work together, as well as working together with the regional planning money where they have sub allocations. We encourage folks to coordinate.
Yeah. Okay. Looks like we have a question about objective design review standards. Can they do objective design review standards for all land uses, not just multifamily or mixed use?
Right. So as long as we have a nexus to accelerating production and facilitating compliance with the 6-cycle RENA, then it's likely eligible.
Okay.
So if they want to do mixed use, or, you know, if there's some sort of residential component in there, then we're likely in an eligible space.
Okay. Then we have a question about the time frame for the designations for pro-housing. That's coming out later in this year. You did the draft late last year, right? And then the rulemaking, you're going through the rulemaking process now.
Right.
And then the final regs will be out when?
Well, by statute, we need to have the pro-housing in place by July 2021. But we're just kind of recognizing that, look, we have the planning money now, so how do we shoehorn this to make it work?
Totally.
So we're trying to have something out by this summer.
Right.
Hoping that there's some sort of coordination there.
Okay. And then there's you know, a question here about is this a competitive grant? No, LEAP is not a competitive grant. And then also the follow-up question was, do you have to be labeled pro-housing in order to get a LEAP grant? And that's no, they're totally different processes.
Yeah.
They're just kind of happening at a similar time frame.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to be labeled pro-housing for a LEAP grant, but you could use your LEAP grant to get a pro-housing designation later in the future.
Yeah, we'll go through it later. This is an over-the-counter program. It's not competitive. It does not even have thresholds in terms of housing element compliance or annual progress reports. It's mainly about just demonstrating that nexus to accelerating housing production.
Okay, good. And then there's a question about, can you confirm if using grant funds to pay for existing staff working on the project is eligible? So can you use some of the funding to help pay for staffing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, and would it cover both salary and benefits or only salary?
I guess it's whatever that personal year.
Okay. Okay. And then can you clarify the implementation component with the 6-cycle RENA? Is this separate from the implementation policies already identified in our general plan?
Not really.
It's referring to the housing element paired with an implementation component.
Yeah, so the major goals of the program are to accelerate housing production and facilitate compliance to implement the 6-cycle RENA. We look at that as something very, very broad. Like if you want to do a rezoning up front to help with your RENA, if you want to do an expedited permit processing, that's all eligible. So it could be in your existing general plan and your existing housing element, it could be in your proposed housing element, or even to help you prepare for the upcoming rain cycle.
Yeah.
It's very, very broad and flexible.
Okay. And would planning or zoning for homeless shelters be an eligible activity?
At this point, you'd have to have some sort of nexus to accelerating housing production, so we're usually looking at units. However, we have built in some flexibility with other local governments where they might be doing some things on the homelessness front, but they're coupling that with other activities.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's room for some creativity there.
Okay. Okay, great. All right, well, that looks like most all the questions for now. So let's move back to where we left off. And I believe we are right here with the application process.
We will now go into our application forms and process. Again, the application is due July 1st. And we highly encourage you to submit as early as possible. You can find the application on the LEAP Funding webpage on our department's website under the Grants and Funding tab. Our application process includes 4 steps. Your application must be postmarked by the deadline of July 1st, 2020. We highly recommend submitting your application as early as possible. Once received, the department will complete a preliminary review within 30 days of receipt. Within those 30 days, you will be contacted if we need any additional information to support your application and get it to the point where it can be approved. We will then issue award letters within 60 days of receiving your application. Subsequently, we will work on executing a standard agreement within 60 days of issuing an award letter. There are 6 main components of our application. The first, a project description. Here you should describe each activity, tasks associated with each activity, and plans for adopting or implementing the proposed activity. 2, a project timeline, and budget including deliverables, substeps, and a task for adoption or implementation. Third, attachment 2, which quantifies the nexus to production. 4, attachment 3, where you will demonstrate consistency with state and other planning priorities. 5th, a signed and completed resolution. There is a required template that you should follow and can be found as part of our application. Also, make sure you include your tax ID form. As mentioned, there are 2 required attachments to our application. The first is our nexus. As part of the application and to accomplish the goals of the program, an applicant needs to demonstrate how the proposed activity has a nexus to accelerating housing production. To do that, you can use a project description to explain your nexus and fill out attachment 2 to quantify the nexus. It's important to note that demonstrating a nexus and quantifying outcomes is required for each of the proposed activities. To successfully complete attachment 2 and demonstrate the nexus, please consider some of these questions while you are brainstorming eligible projects. What are the anticipated outcomes of your proposed project? Will it reduce processing time? Will it reduce development costs imposed on the city or developer? Will it increase approval certainty by reducing discretionary review? Will it increase how many entitlements get processed? Will it increase the feasibility of development projects? Will zoning increase the number of units permitted? Brainstorm through these questions and see how your proposed project will answer one or a few of these questions. Each of the activities being proposed should demonstrate a nexus to production. The second attachment, state and other planning priorities. Applications should demonstrate how they have been consistent with state or other planning priorities. They can do this by either 1, showing the proposed activity is consistent, or 2, listing activities that were completed within the last 5 years. The applicant should fill out all areas that apply to your jurisdiction. Resolutions. Resolutions are required as part of the completed application. All resolutions do need to go through a department's internal legal review and get approved. For that reason, we have provided a required template that applicants should use. You must follow the template as close as possible to ensure you do not have to go back to your council and redo a resolution, as that can delay the application process. Reporting. One of the reporting requirements defined by statute for this program is to submit a report to the department annually until the funds have been fully expended. This annual report should include the status of the proposed use that were approved, impact on housing within the region or jurisdiction, a summary of building permits, certificates of occupancy, or other completed entitlement issued by jurisdiction. In addition to the annual reports, once the awardee has completed the deliverables in the standard agreement, you will need to submit a closeout report. The closeout report can be found in the NOFA. The closeout report should include information on a brief summary, lead agency and partnerships, drivers, engagement process, challenges, outcomes, and applicability to other jurisdictions. One of the goals of the closeout report is that the department can collect best practices and showcase completed projects on a statewide level to facilitate a peer-to-peer learning environment. As just mentioned, here's the template for the final closeout report. Key differences between LEAP and SB2. After listening to this presentation, you might be thinking, wow, this sounds exactly like the SB2 Planning Grant Program. That's great. And this program is very much mirrored like the SB2 Planning Grant Program, but with minor modification and improvements. These are the following. Grant amounts. For the SB2 program, we had 3 categories for grant amounts: small, medium, and large. For this program, statute explicitly defines 6 different categories and maximum grant amounts. 2, eligibility. As you might have remembered, to access the SB2 Planning Grants Program, you need to have had a compliant housing element and your APR submitted. For this program, you do not need that. All you need is an eligible project that demonstrates a nexus to production. 3, reporting. The SB2 program requires that you report once when the grant funding is fully expended and you are closing out your project. For LEAP funding, statute states the applicant will submit a report annually. I will now turn it over to Sohab for more on technical assistance.
Okay. While we're transitioning over to Sohab, I got a question. I haven't received any more in a minute, but I got a question about the annual report and the closeout report. It's going to be a report that we can submit online, I'm assuming. Is there kind of like our annual report? Is there for Progress Towards Arena? Is it going to be a similar process?
Yeah, so for the annual report, we'll be developing forms, and that can coincide with your annual progress report that's submitted online.
Excellent.
Pursuant to Government Code 65400 if you're into that stuff.
Yeah.
And we're going to try to make it, as easy as possible.
Good. Okay.
And in the closeout report, we still haven't figured out those mechanics. It's a little bit down the road, but we'll be trying to facilitate something that's easy.
Right. So it sounds like, at least for the annual report, you're trying to make it as consistent with the annual report we already have to do, so that we can kind of marry each other. And okay, that sounds good.
We'll develop a form and a template, online, all that stuff. That's coming out.
Fantastic. Okay, so I don't see any other questions. So Sohab, you're up to talk a little bit about available technical assistance resources. And I see in this photo that we have some of our folks from the Institute for Local Government, actually.
Yeah.
So let's say there's Carly in there. So
Yeah. I mean, if you want to go in just one back, if you want an overview of those photos, the reason why it's there is actually those were photos from our SB2 Technical Assistance Roadshow, and that's the reason. One of the reasons why it's up there is because I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our roadshow for LEAP and REAP and ProHousing. So ideally, to apply for this funding, and you may also be wondering how to apply for additional funding programs and keep up with state housing element laws, paired with this Budget Act and then the 2017 housing package, as some of you may know, came funding for TA programs that help cities and counties essentially accelerate housing production. So from the SB2 TA program, as many of you know, we've provided direct assistance to over 300 local governments in applying and accessing SB2 funds. Many of you probably took advantage of that direct assistance through getting feedback on your applications and feedback on eligible activities. Through the same TA program, we'll also now be providing ongoing assistance, which is beyond the direct assistance, and it will be regionally tailored. We will be working with regional and sub-regional governments to create and develop a TA program that's tailored to your unique needs of your region. I'll go into a little bit more detail about that on the next slide. Lastly, we'll be supplementing the SB2 TA program with additional assistance. We currently have an RFP out for $4.5 million to contract with a team that will be providing targeted direct assistance and supplementing the SB2 technical assistance. So what's available right now? Through the SB2 ongoing TA program, We're still working with the regional, sub-regional, and counties to tailor a program that's focused on your regional needs. A regionally tailored TA program can include things like customized toolkits, housing element workshops, housing workshops, maybe public engagement. It can include a wide variety of activities that's tailored to your regional needs. We'll do this through developing regionally tailored TA plans. So we expect to have meetings with each region or sub-region in California, discuss the challenges and needs, and develop a TA plan that will address those needs. So what's coming soon? For many of you who participated in the SB2 Planning Grants program and contacted your PlaceWorks regional liaison, we will also have the same program available for LEAP funding, where you can contact a TA person to get feedback on your application and eligible activities. Much like how you're able to contact your regional representative, you will be able to do that again. With the RFP out for $4.5 million that's soliciting proposals for a consulting team, they will work on the TA as such, providing direct assistance on your application. But that RFP and that new TA program will include a lot more, including toolkits, possibly consulting benches, assistance with your site inventories, and implementing pro-housing policies, and resources and best practices to help engage your public and local elected officials around housing discussions.
Okay, so in the meantime, we've had a couple more questions come in, and it looks like maybe the next one actually, you're coming soon, might actually answer it. So this person wants to accelerate the production of housing in the community. So what about if they use the LEAP funds to pre-identify some affordable housing sites for production, including doing some initial sequel work? Does that sound like a good LEAP funding activity?
Yes, with just a few caveats. So one thing about the LEAP as well as the SB2 planning grant is it's for planning documents, it's for process improvements. We got a lot of questions about just doing a very project-specific plan, like a site plan or something like that, and we veered away from that, but we also built in some flexibility. So what I mean by that is if it has some sort of ongoing effect, or if it has something that is has a significant community-wide benefit, then we were open to it. So here in this case, if you were to just do the sequel work on just one site, probably no, unless there's some sort of scalability to it, something that you can repeat on a more ongoing basis.
Okay.
Here, it looks like they're trying to identify some of their sites, maybe for their six-cycle arena up front, and to do some of the sequel work around that. So it's probably going to be more than one site. That's likely a good fit. However, keep in mind at the end of the day, we do expect something to be adopted. So just doing initial work by itself wouldn't be sufficient. You want to have something that's going to have an effect or have some sort of outcome, something that's completed.
Yeah, okay. And then there's a question here about the annual report. They want to know, is the report just for the years that they're actually performing the activity, or is it going to be annually forever?
No, so the annual report is just for the years that you'll be taking to expend the funds. So for example, the expenditure deadline is December 2023. If you've completed your project and expended your funds by then you would just submit a closeout report. Once that closeout report is submitted, you no longer have to report annually.
Okay. And can you use LEAP funds solely for the creation of an updated housing element in the sixth cycle?
So that one has a few twists to it. You've seen in the NOFA, we've kind of called out that, yes, housing elements are eligible. However, there's kind of an expectation that it's coupled with something. And a lot of where that comes from is that in many cases, the amount of the grant exceeds what a housing element should cost.
Right.
And a lot of that came from SB2. But then we also have learned some things around the sixth cycle that housing elements cost a little bit more this time because of some of the recent legislation. So we still called out that that the housing element should be coupled with some sort of implementation. However, we also are aware that for some of the smaller cities that might not be sufficient. So we could be open to that conversation. It's somewhat case by case. But housing element or any planning document from the general plan down to CEQA is an eligible use.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Fantastic. Okay. So there's another question about additional requirements under the building code, and how some recent changes and updates to the building code have caused housing production costs to go up a little bit. You know, and the question is probably more general, not so much about the LEAP or the REAP funding, but, you know, is there, you know, discussion about this? Is this something that, you know, is occurring within HCD or the legislature? I mean, I think certainly in the legislature there's some talk around this, trying to find ways of reducing costs. I think from a local government perspective, often we feel, you know, it's always looked at us and the processes that we have, or, you know, the conditions at the local level, and there's not quite that nod to maybe some changes in the building code or other places, or maybe holding off potentially on some additional changes to keep costs down. Is that something the department's thinking about? I mean, it's kind of outside your guys' realm, right? I mean, you guys implement the law that's in place. The building codes come from the commission, a little bit different from you all, but is there anything you can share on that?
Yeah, I mean, when we go through the code updates and steward that process, that's always part of the conversation. However, in our policy development division, we're not actively thinking about this, but we do think about the entirety of development costs and how we can mitigate those costs through a variety of measures.
Yeah, and I wonder in the annual report, or the report we do every month at the beginning of the housing development cycle, we talk about, you know, local constraints and the non-governmental constraints. I mean, I think that if a city feels as though there are some additional constraints out there that are beyond their control, they can talk about those, I would think, in the context of what's going on at the local level. If they feel that maybe the new solar requirement or something, you know, is added cost, that they could identify that in their housing or in that analysis. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so it looks like we have one other question really is about, you know, will this be made available on both the audio and the video? Absolutely. Everybody who registered today will receive it from us, but then I believe the department's going to go through and put it on their website, and maybe Saul could talk a little bit about some of the outreach that they're going to do. But for those on the call today, yes, you'll receive it today at some point from the league.
Sure, yeah. So in addition to this webinar and receiving it from the league, we will be posting it on our website at the LEAP funding webpage, and we'll also be sending out an e-blast to everyone on the email list, so you'll get a copy in 2 different ways. And then also, in addition to the webinar, we are hosting a series of workshops that I believe you can still apply for or still register for throughout this week and next week in Southern California at SCAG headquarters, at ABAG headquarters, Southern California headquarters, Bay Area headquarters, Butte County, and I believe we are planning for one more workshop in San Diego. But in addition to these workshops, especially because you may be far away from that central location, we are looking to do regional workshops, so coming down to a much more regional level and more local locations to host those workshops. So if you cannot make it to one of these NOFA workshops that I listed, and you can find that information on our website, feel free to reach out to us or coordinate with your COGS, and feel free to invite us to do a more regional workshop in your location.
Great. And maybe if there's a way for you maybe get a link to the workshops, we can include it in our outreach materials for those that registered, and we'll push it out again this week to let everybody know that the workshops are happening. I know you guys obviously sent out a bunch of information already, but if there's any way we can, you know, double tap it and see if folks want to attend, we'd be more than happy to send that out as well.
Yeah, I'll share it with you, Jason, afterwards.
Yep. Looks like we have one other question. We have time for a few more questions, so if folks think please do send it in. We just answered. So for sure you are going to get it in multiple ways from the league, and then also it'll be available through the department on their website. I wonder, you know, having looked at the Planning Commissioners Academy that's coming up here in Sacramento, are you guys on? Do you guys have a panel at the Planners Commission?
No, but we would certainly be open to it.
Okay. If they invite us, we'll come.
Yeah, I know. I know we invited you guys kind of late city managers, and you came, and it was fantastic.
Right.
I think we had, there's well over 100, probably 130 folks or so there, which was, I think at the time, we took away from a lot of the other sessions. We had 4 going on at the same time. Ours was the most well-attended, the HCD, ILG, and League talk on a lot of this, which was fantastic. So let me see if we have room to do like a little late-breaking session at Planners.
Sure.
So for all the planners that are on this call, maybe we can find a way to make that happen. If not, I mean, I'm sure we can figure out a way to continue to push out the information, host webinars, whatever is needed, because it's certainly in our city's best interest to learn about this, and it's obviously, you know, we want to take you up on the offer to help us get the money.
Also, just wanted to provide, I think there's another slide on it maybe towards the end, a couple more venues to talk to us and have us answer any questions. or even provide you some direct assistance on maybe your eligible activities, again, in the interim, while we're getting that TA program running. So for the early action planning grants, which we talked about today, both for the LEAP and the REAP, you can contact any of our team members, including me and Hillary and Irvin and Paul, who talked about it today, at earlyactionplanning@hcd.ca.gov. If you have more information specifically on ProHousing, the program and the policies, you can reach the team at prohousingpolicies@hcd.ca.gov. And then if you're interested in some of the regional technical assistance that I talked about and creating those TA plans, you can contact us at the SB2 Planning Grant at hcd.ca.gov, or you can just use the same early action planning at hcd.ca.gov. It's the same team anyways. So you can feel free to send any of your questions through that email box or those emails, and we'll be happy to answer and do any follow-up.
Okay, great. Looks like we have one more question that came in. They want to know, can HCD provide more information about the reimbursement process, and what will be required for backup or documentation? So they give an example of, does HCD prefer to see a breakdown of spending by task or project versus the total amount spent in the grant, and then what should they track?
Sure. So in the application, local governments will fill out what we call the timetable or the schedule of action. So a lot of there you're going to see your tasks and subtasks, and you can reimburse either on a quarterly basis, or submit invoices on a quarterly basis, or as you complete those tasks. And so we'll want to see some sense of the money being spent on each one of those tasks.
Okay.
As far as documentation, we still have to hammer out those specifics, but we're looking to be fairly light on the documentation, but kind of reserving the discretion to ask for documentation if we need it.
Right. Okay. Okay, great. Well, I don't see any other questions. Are there any, final comments that anybody from HCD would like to provide? If not, we can close things out, and again, everybody will receive this via email, and then look out for the additional information on the department's website and future engagement opportunities. Any final words, HCD?
I can do it.
No, one thing I just want to maybe if we can kind of go around the table with some helpful hints, lessons learned from the SB2 planning grant. One is that resolution thing. That we said, what did we call it last time? We called it like sample resolution. But really, we look at that resolution stuff pretty rigidly for good reasons, and so stick to that template.
Okay. Maybe just a little bit more about the reso. So the reso, everybody has to pass the resolution, and the resolution is intended to be somewhat of a roadmap for how you're going to spend the money.
No, it's just like a simple authorization of who and how much and that kind of stuff. I mean, there's like, why don't we just go over the 4 basic components real quick on the resolution? Yeah.
Do you want me? Okay. So the resolution it's very similar to the SB2 planning grants resolution. So again, if you participated, it's generally the same thing. And the idea with the resolution is that it just includes that, hey, I'm applying for the program, I'm applying for this grant amount, and making sure you have authorization to apply for it. It's pretty broad and general, so it doesn't really specify what specific activity you're doing. Just make sure that you get that authorization to apply for the program. The resolution does need to be completed and submitted with the application. So that's why, one, we recommend that if you're planning on applying, to take a look at that resolution and start working on it now, especially if it could take a long time to get that resolution to your council. And then two, it comes down to, we also would encourage everyone to apply as soon as possible. So again, looking at that resolution is important as much as early on as much as you can.
And we're open to reviewing draft resolutions. It's really...
That's what I was going to ask. It sounds like you really want folks to follow the template that's provided. If there's a need for deviation, perhaps bounce it off you guys before they formally adopt, because they may not get accepted then.
Yeah, absolutely. We're happy to, if you have a draft resolution, if you had to make some changes to that template that we provide, feel free to email us at that earlyactionplanning@hcd.ca.gov. And then we can talk about, those deviations and see what kind of, if it's acceptable.
Yeah, and it's a good question on where you can find the template. That's all going to be on that website, right?
Correct, yeah,
Right.
all on the website, all part of that application package on that website, so when you download it, the resolution is part of the package.
Okay. And if they have questions, it would be the early action plan, the left-hand side piece of where, if they have questions about access to the document, y'all can help out from that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, say another big takeaway from the SB2 planning grant was that timetable, where we're basically to schedule tasks and amounts, and when you start, when you end. We would get some applications that just says, we're doing a zoning code, right? But we need a little more detail in that, but we're not asking for too much. So to add just a few substeps like outreach, draft, adoption is super important, and you can also reimburse as you complete that to keep money flowing. So that would be, I think, one of my biggest takeaways from the SB2 planning grant, right? Some tasks. Any others?
A big one was also the TIN form.
Okay.
There were a number of jurisdictions that submitted with a W-9 instead of a TIN, and that also held them up. And like I stated, the resolutions were pretty big. There were a number of exceptions that we did make for who was authorized to execute the resolutions, but aside from that, when we did get those few that kind of veered off from our template, those applications tended to stay on hold for a longer period of time when, they could have moved along in the process.
Yeah. And maybe just one last plea that earlier is better.
Yes.
We finally got our kind of our review process down where we would review it and approve it as a team and then go through our internal award process within 30 days. And then we received like 300 applications in one day. And
There's always great outreach.
Which is awesome, and so it takes a while to digest all that at one point. So, to the extent that folks can submit those applications early, we can get the money flowing a lot faster. We have our boilerplate fairly ready for our standard agreement, so we just want to see those applications as early as possible.
Okay.
That July deadline will come up quick.
Yeah.
We have created with this application something that's like SB2, which we thought was pretty minimal. We gave it about like a 30% haircut. So hopefully it's simple. You can do it on your own. If you're spending more than a couple hours, call us because we probably can help you get a lot faster.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah. That's about it. That's all.
No more questions from Guido?
Yeah, no, any other
Come on,
questions?
Guido.
You can call it out?
I know, Paul.
You need to call it out?
But again, thank you very much for everybody who participated. Really big thank you to HCD. We've been working really well together the last few years, and I think getting this information out has just been fantastic, and it's really, helping all of our jurisdictions. I was really encouraged to see so many cities and counties apply for the money. I was a little unsure of how many cities would really apply for it. And I think it really just sends a strong message to the legislature that, hey, cities are serious about housing, cities want to see production in their community, we just need some help. And I think having that funding out there has made a big difference, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot of success on this one as well. So thank you very much at HCD. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Saul. I really appreciate all the efforts. It's been a great team effort.
Great.
And with that, thank you very much for participating, and look out for an email following up with important information on how you can access the audio and the slides, and there'll be a lot more information to come. Thank you so much.